Picture a Tuesday evening in November 2019. Inside a nondescript studio at BBC headquarters in London, two people are seated across from each other. The lighting is deliberate and cold. The chairs are rigid. The air in the room carries the specific, suffocating weight of a moment that everyone present already understands is significant, and nobody is entirely certain how catastrophic it is about to become. On one side of that room sits Emily Maitlis, one of the most composed, most methodical, most formidably prepared journalists in British broadcasting. She has spent weeks on this, every document reviewed, every photograph examined, every publicly available detail of the story she is about to pursue committed to memory. She is not nervous, she is ready. On the other side sits Prince Andrew, Duke of York, son of the Queen, a man who, according to his own advisors, has agreed to this interview because openness will help him. Because sitting down, answering questions directly and without flinching, will finally lance this wound and let it heal. His team told him this. His team believed this. His team was wrong in a way that history will not stop talking about. Within the first 10 minutes, something began to happen that was not remarkable in the way great television is remarkable. It was remarkable in the way a slow-motion structural collapse is remarkable. You can see exactly where it is going. You cannot bring yourself to look away, and you feel something specific watching it, a kind of helpless, hollow dread as each answer makes the next question more devastating than the one before. Andrew claimed he had no memory of the woman who had accused him, despite the existence of a photograph that appeared to show them together, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling in a way that is difficult to fake. He suggested the photograph itself might not be real. He described returning to stay at the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan home as an act of gentlemanly honor. And then came the moment that the internet wrapped itself around and refused to release for weeks. His accuser had stated that on the night in question, Andrew had been sweating heavily on the dance floor of a London nightclub. Andrew's response, delivered with complete composure, as though the explanation itself was perfectly ordinary, was that this was physically impossible. He had developed a condition, he explained, following his military service in the Falklands War that had rendered him medically incapable of perspiring. The studio held its silence for one long beat. Emily Maitlis moved to the next question, and somewhere across the United Kingdom, millions of people watching at home turned to the person sitting next to them and said some version of the same thing. Did he actually just say that? But here is the thing. This video is not really about Andrew. It never was. It is about two women who had absolutely nothing to do with any of it and who have been paying the price ever since. 2 days after that interview aired, a photographer caught something that was not designed to be seen. Princess Beatrice, outside a grocery store somewhere in London. No security detail visible. No staff. No carefully managed public appearance with the right backdrop and the practiced smile. Just a woman in a coat, carrying shopping bags, eyes aimed at the pavement, walking to her car like someone who is trying very hard to simply move through the world without the world noticing her back. She had not given an interview. She had issued no statement. She had done nothing in the days since the broadcast except exist, which, as it turned out, was already enough to make her a headline. The caption on that photograph in a major British tabloid identified her first and foremost as Andrew's daughter, not as a businesswoman, not as a mother, not as a person with her own history, her own career, her own identity built deliberately over years of real work. A footnote, a supporting character in somebody else's disaster. That photograph is not famous. It was not widely shared. It did not circulate across social media the way the interview clips did. But if you want to understand what the next 6 years of Beatrice and Eugenie's lives were actually going to look like, that image tells you more than any headline ever could. They had just become collateral damage, and the worst of it hadn't even started yet. To understand what these two women stood to lose, you have to first understand what they actually built. Not the version that fills the covers of glossy magazines, the tiaras, the balconies, the ceremonial appearances curated for maximum pageantry. The real version, The version that exists behind the official portraits and the palace press releases and the carefully managed distance between who they are and who the public is allowed to believe they are. Because the truth about Beatrice and Eugenie is more complicated and more human than either the adoring coverage or the dismissive tabloid treatment has ever properly captured. They were never going to be queen. That was not their trajectory, and to their genuine credit, neither of them ever behaved as though they believed otherwise. In the brutal arithmetic of royal succession, they existed in a specific category, close enough to the institution to feel its weight, far enough from the center to build something resembling an actual life. And both of them took that latitude seriously. Beatrice, born in 1988, built a real career in the technology sector, not as a figurehead, not as a name attached to a letterhead for institutional credibility, as a working professional. She served as vice president at Affinity, an artificial intelligence company, working specifically in partnership development and strategy. She spoke at technology conferences. She sat in rooms where the agenda was the agenda, and the people across the table were not interested in her title. They were interested in whether she had done her homework. By multiple accounts from colleagues who have spoken on background, she had. She arrived prepared. She asked sharp, specific questions. She did not use her surname as a substitute for substance. For someone born into a system that makes genuine professional anonymity functionally impossible, this was not a minor achievement. It was quietly remarkable. Eugenie followed a parallel path through a different world. She built her career in the art industry, working her way through auction houses and galleries before joining Hauser and Worth, one of the most respected contemporary art spaces in the world. She was not decorating the institution. She was working inside it, in a field that is notoriously brutal to enter and even more unforgiving to survive in on merit alone. But beyond her career, Eugenie did something that set her apart even within the extended royal family. She used the platform she had for something she actually cared about. In 2017, she co-founded the Anti-Slavery Collective alongside her close friend Julia de Boinville, an organization built around raising awareness of modern slavery and human trafficking. This was not a cause handed to her by a palace communications advisor looking for something palatable and uncontroversial. It was personal. It reflected a genuine moral commitment that she has spoken about with a specificity and a fire that is very difficult to manufacture convincingly if you do not actually mean it. Their marriages, framed honestly, were not transactions. Beatrice married Edoardo Mappelli Mazzi in 2020. A small, intimate ceremony scaled back because of the pandemic, but radiating the particular quiet confidence that belongs to people who are not performing their happiness for the cameras. She became a stepmother to his son Wolfie. She became a mother to their daughter Sienna, born in 2021. Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank in 2018 in a ceremony that was, by every credible account, genuinely joyful. She became a mother to their son August, born in 2021, and a second son, Ernest, born in 2023. By any reasonable measure, both women had done exactly what the secondary royals are quietly expected to do. They had built lives. Real ones with morning routines, school runs, professional deadlines, and the ordinary irreplaceable texture of an existence that belonged to them. And then their father sat down in that BBC studio, and everything they had constructed, the careers, the reputations, the careful, deliberate distance they had maintained from the worst of the royal spotlight, was suddenly and permanently downstream of a scandal they had no part in creating and no power to stop. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. And let's be very clear about what that means and what it does not mean. No conspiracy theories. No speculation about who knew what when they knew it or how high it reaches. Just the documented timeline laid out in sequence without embellishment, because the facts alone, in the order they actually occurred, are more than sufficient to make your stomach turn. Jeffrey Epstein was born in Brooklyn in 1953. He constructed a career in finance that was, by the conventional metrics of wealth and access, extraordinarily successful, and by every other metric, deeply and persistently suspicious. He accumulated an enormous fortune through means that even his closest professional associates struggled to explain clearly or convincingly. And he cultivated friendships with politicians, scientists, billionaires, academics, and royalty, with a deliberateness that in retrospect looks far less like social ambition and far more like the architectural construction of a protective shield. The more powerful the people in your orbit, the harder it becomes to touch you. He was arrested for the first time in 2008 in Florida on charges related to the solicitation of prostitution from a minor. What happened next became, years later, a scandal within the scandal, arguably as damning as the original crime. Federal prosecutor Alexander Acosta, who would later serve as Secretary of Labor under President Trump, brokered a plea agreement that allowed Epstein to plead guilty to state-level charges, serve 13 months in county jail with generous work release privileges, and avoid federal prosecution entirely. The victims were not notified of the deal before it was finalized. Legal experts described it, with increasing bluntness as the years passed, as one of the most lenient outcomes ever extended to a serial sex offender of Epstein's alleged scale. Acosta eventually resigned from his cabinet position when the full details of that arrangement became public knowledge in 2019. But here is the precise timeline that matters for this story. By the time of that 2008 conviction, Prince Andrew had already been photographed with Epstein on multiple occasions. He had already visited Epstein's properties in both New York and Florida. He had already been seen repeatedly publicly in the company of a man who had just been convicted of sex crimes involving a minor, and he did not distance himself. In 2010, 2 full years after Epstein's conviction, Andrew was photographed walking alongside him through Central Park in New York City. The images were captured by multiple photographers in broad daylight. 2 men strolling together, apparently unbothered, apparently at ease, apparently unconcerned about what the world would make of the sight. The photographs circulated globally. The questions they generated never went away. They never stopped circulating. They never stopped being cited. They became part of the permanent public record in a way that no amount of official denial could dislodge. And then came November 2019. The BBC Newsnight interview is now studied in journalism schools, in crisis communications courses, and in media studies programs at universities around the world, not as a model of effective damage limitation, as a masterclass in how a manageable crisis can be transformed into an unmanageable catastrophe inside 60 minutes of live television. Andrew volunteered for it. His team believed that transparency would neutralize the story. That sitting down with a respected journalist and answering questions calmly and directly would put this to rest. They had fundamentally misread both the story and their principle, with a thoroughness that communication professionals still struggle to fully account for. Within the first 20 minutes, Andrew had claimed no memory of Virginia Giuffre despite the existence of a photograph widely believed to show them together. He described his decision to stay at Epstein's Manhattan mansion after the conviction as an act of honor, a face-to-face delivery of an uncomfortable message. He raised doubts about the photograph's authenticity without producing any evidence to support that position. And then came the sweating. Giuffre had stated that on the night in question, Andrew had been perspiring heavily on a nightclub dance floor in London. Andrew's response, calm, considered, entirely unaware of how it would land, was that this was a physiological impossibility. Following his military service in the Falklands, he explained, he had developed a condition that had since rendered him physically incapable of sweating. The reaction was immediate and it was global. In the United States, late-night hosts ran the clip on a loop. In Britain, every major newspaper front page led with variations of the same conclusion. Andrew had walked into the interview with a problem and walked out with a catastrophe. Legal analysts noted, with increasing exasperation, that almost every answer had either contradicted publicly available evidence or created entirely new lines of inquiry that would take years to resolve. 3 days after the broadcast, Andrew stepped back from royal duties. In February 2022, he reached a civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre, no admission of liability, a financial figure widely reported to run into the millions, and a reported funding arrangement involving the late Queen's personal resources that generated its own wave of controversy. The settlement did not close the chapter. It confirmed the weight of it. Then the Epstein court documents began unsealing in a federal court in New York. Through 2023 and into 2024, release after release, name after name, detail after detail. Each document drop guaranteed another news cycle. Each cycle dragged the same names back into the headlines. Andrews, and alongside it every time two others, Beatrice, Eugenie, not because they were implicated, not because they had done anything wrong, because in the brutal and indiscriminate logic of public scandal, proximity is guilt enough for a headline. And their proximity, the biological, unchosen, permanent proximity of being someone's daughters, was something no amount of careful living could erase. Here is something that royal commentary almost never does. It rarely looks backward. It chases the drama of the current moment, the arrests, the settlements, the interviews, the breaking headlines, without pausing to ask the question that actually tells you where any of this is going. Has the British monarchy navigated a moment like this before? Has it ever found itself in a position where the conduct of one member threatened to contaminate the institution itself, and had to make the cold, surgical decision to sever that connection? The answer is yes, more than once, more than twice, and the history of precisely how it handled each of those moments tells you almost everything you need to know about what is approaching for Beatrice and Eugenie. The first precedent, Edward VIII, 1936. Edward VIII abdicated the throne in December of that year to marry Wally Simpson, an American divorcee. The abdication itself was the most significant constitutional rupture the British monarchy had experienced in centuries. But here is the detail that actually matters for this story. Edward did not simply lose the throne. He lost his position within the working institution entirely. He was granted the title Duke of Windsor and dispatched into what amounted to a permanent, gilded exile in France. He was never permitted to return to royal life in any functional capacity. His wife was deliberately and publicly denied the style of Her Royal Highness, a decision that wounded Edward deeply, and that every party involved understood as a calculated act of institutional distancing. The message required no press release. You made your choice. The institution made its choice. Those two choices are incompatible, and this institution does not bend to accommodate the difference. Edward died in 1972, having spent 36 years in a form of constitutional suspension, royal enough to carry the name, marginal enough to pose no threat to the crown's credibility. The monarchy survived. The man did not thrive. The second precedent, Peter Phillips and Zara Tindall. This one is less dramatic, less discussed, and for precisely those reasons, far more instructive. When Princess Anne gave birth to Peter Phillips in 1977 and Zara Phillips, now Tindall, in 1981, she made a decision that was, by the standards of the institution, quietly radical. She declined to request royal titles for her children. They were born into the family. They carried the bloodline. They were given no formal designation. The results, 4 decades on, speak clearly. Peter Phillips and Zara Tindall are two of the most genuinely well-regarded members of the extended royal family. Peter built a career in sports marketing and events management. Zara became an Olympic equestrian who won a silver medal at the London 2012 Games, on merit, on ability, on years of work in a discipline that offers no courtesy points for your grandmother's surname. They attend royal events. They are visibly part of the family. But when royal scandals ignite, their names are almost never in the first paragraph. Princess Anne, it turns out, understood something about the mechanics of the monarchy that most of its members only discover when it is already too late. The title is not always the shield. Sometimes the title is precisely what makes you the target. The third precedent, Harry and Meghan, the most recent, the most complicated, and in certain ways the most cautionary. Harry and Meghan chose to step back from senior royal duties in 2020. They retained their titles. They relocated to the United States. They attempted to build a life that was simultaneously royal enough to carry the institution's credibility and independent enough to escape its constraints. It has not resolved cleanly for either purpose. They are still royal enough to generate coverage. They are no longer royal enough to receive institutional protection. They inhabit a permanent no-man's land that satisfies nobody, not the palace, not the press, not by most credible accounts themselves. The lesson of Harry and Meghan is not that leaving was wrong. The lesson is that half leaving is the worst possible outcome. 3 precedents, 3 different conclusions. Edward VIII forced out, title retained, a lifetime in the margins. Peter and Zara, titles declined from birth, lived freely, built quietly, thrived. Harry and Meghan, titles retained, duties abandoned, caught permanently between 2 worlds. Now look at Beatrice and Eugenie. They did not choose any of this, but the monarchy is not asking what they chose. It is asking what the institution requires, and history strongly suggests it already knows the answer. There is a specific kind of pain that has no adequate name. It is the experience of watching someone you love destroy themselves, and understanding, with a clarity that arrives slowly and then all at once, that every piece of the wreckage is going to land on you as well. You did not light the match. You did not pour the fuel. You were not present when any of it began, but you are standing close enough that the burns are real. That is the territory that Beatrice and Eugenie have occupied for the last 6 years. Think about what Beatrice's daily reality actually looks like. She is a mother. She has a daughter, Sienna, born in 2021. She has a stepson, Wolfie, who calls her a parent. She has a husband, Edoardo Mapelli Mazzi, a man who built his career in property development through years of genuine professional effort, who has his own reputation to protect, his own clients to reassure, his own mornings where his phone fills with messages from business associates who want to know his thoughts on the latest headline attached to his father-in-law's name. There is no script for that breakfast table. There is no royal protocol that explains how you sit across from your husband in your own kitchen and account for why his professional world is being reached by something you had no part in. There is no etiquette manual for navigating the precise, careful tension of a business dinner where someone raises the subject with the tentative tone of a person who is genuinely unsure how close they are standing to an open wound. Edoardo has never spoken publicly about any of this. That silence is its own kind of answer. Eugenie faces the same reality from a slightly different angle. Her husband, Jack Brooksbank, works in hospitality and spirits, an industry constructed entirely on the architecture of relationships, personal reputation, and the carefully sustained perception of who you are and who you are connected to. Every new wave of Epstein coverage is not simply a personal injury for Eugenie. It is professional pressure for Jack. A question that hangs in the air, unasked and inescapable over every room he enters, every partnership conversation he navigates, every introduction that begins with the words, and of course you know who his wife is. Jack has not spoken publicly either, but people close to the couple have described the weight of it in terms that are difficult to read without feeling something genuine and uncomfortable. And then there are the children. Sienna is 4, August is 3, Ernest is 2. They are at the age when the world is still wonderfully, mercifully simple, when a photograph is just a photograph, when a newspaper is just paper, when grandfather is just a person they may or may not see at Christmas. That will not last. Someday, sooner than any parent would wish, these children will be old enough to type a name into a search engine, old enough to read a headline, old enough to ask a question. What do you tell a child about a grandfather they deserve to love, whose name has become synonymous with something unlovable? There is no clean answer to that question. There is only the attempt to find language that is honest enough to be trustworthy and gentle enough not to cause damage that cannot be repaired. But here is what makes this situation uniquely, almost unbearably airless. A private individual in this position has options. They can give an interview. They can issue a statement. They can draw a clear, public line between themselves and the person causing the harm. They can say simply, "I love my father, but I cannot defend what he has done." Beatrice and Eugenie cannot do that. The royal family operates on a code of silence so deeply embedded in its institutional structure that breaking it, even to defend yourself, even to protect your children, even to state something plainly true, is treated as a greater transgression than almost any underlying scandal could ever be. Harry broke that code. The institution has never forgiven him for it, so they stay silent. They wear the right clothes. They stand in the right positions. They smile the smiles that are expected. And the blast radius expands year by year, document by document, headline by headline in every direction, including the direction of their children's futures. The British monarchy does not make emotional decisions. It makes calculated ones. Slow, deliberate, and almost always irreversible by the time the public understands what has been decided. The institution has survived 1,000 years of wars, revolutions, abdications, and scandals, not because it is sentimental, but because at its core, it is ruthlessly, quietly pragmatic. And right now, the machinery is moving. To understand what that means for Beatrice and Eugenie, you need to understand the project that King Charles III has been building, methodically and without apology, since the moment he took the throne in September 2022. In public briefings, in carefully placed media conversations, in the visible restructuring of royal appointments and official engagements, Charles has been advancing a vision of the monarchy that he argued for even during his mother's reign. Smaller, tighter, more deliberate, more accountable, requiring every participant to actively and visibly earn their place through consistency, service, and an untarnished connection to what the crown is meant to represent. The working press calls it the slimmed-down monarchy. The concept is straightforward in principle and brutal in its application. Reduce the number of working royals, reduce the public expenditure, reduce the ceremonial footprint, and focus the institution on a compact, defined inner circle. That inner circle is immovable: Charles and Camilla, William and Catherine, their 3 children George, Charlotte, and Louis. On the outer edges, Princess Anne, whose decades of tireless, consistent service have rendered her functionally irreplaceable. Perhaps Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, whose quiet professionalism has rebuilt a reputation that once appeared permanently compromised. Everyone else is peripheral, and peripheral in Charles's monarchy is not a protected position. Now place Andrew in that picture. He has not performed a single official royal duty since November 2019. For years after the Newsnight disaster, he fought publicly, expensively, and with remarkable stubbornness to retain the trappings of royal status while contributing nothing to its function. He fought to maintain a personal security detail funded at public expense despite holding no public role, a cost reported to run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds annually, generating sustained and entirely justified public anger. He refused for years to vacate Royal Lodge, the 30-room Windsor estate he had occupied for years, even as Charles made increasingly clear that he intended the property returned to active institutional use. The standoff became a symbol, a senior royal consuming the crown's resources while producing nothing but sustained reputational damage in return. And then came February 2026. Andrew was arrested on his 66th birthday on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Metropolitan police officers arrived at Royal Lodge in the early hours of the morning. The charge carried a specific institutional gravity that no civil proceeding had ever quite managed to generate. Here is why that distinction matters enormously. A civil settlement, however damaging, however expensive, however publicly humiliating, can be managed. It can be framed as resolution. It can be presented, however unconvincingly, as the closing of a chapter. A criminal arrest cannot be managed in the same way. It sits in the public record with a different kind of permanence. It demands a different category of institutional response. The palace's response was characteristic and immediate. Silence. No statement from Buckingham Palace. No visible communication from Charles. No word from William. The institution closed around the event the way water closes over a stone, absorbing it, concealing it, continuing on with the surface apparently undisturbed. But beneath that surface, sources close to both Beatrice and Eugenie described a quality to this moment that was different from everything that had come before. Not simply shock, though there was shock even now, even after everything. Something closer to finality. The recognition that this particular wave was not going to recede on its own, that when it withdrew, it was going to carry something with it that could not be recovered. Stripping a member of the royal family of their HRH designation is not a simple administrative act. It requires a formal decision at the highest institutional levels. A letters patent issued by the sovereign, advised by the Privy Council, communicated through the Lord Chamberlain's office. The process is slow by design, built to appear measured rather than reactive, constructed to look like the inevitable conclusion of a long institutional deliberation rather than a punishment issued in the heat of a scandal. But make no mistake about what it is. The machinery does not need a dramatic instruction. It just needs someone to stop telling it to wait. And from everything that has surfaced in the weeks since Andrew's arrest, the instruction to wait has, quietly and finally, been withdrawn. Stop here for a moment. Before we talk about conclusions, before we discuss what the palace decides, what the headlines read 6 months from now, what either of these women is left holding when the dust finally settles, there is a question that sits at the absolute center of everything this story is actually about. A question that is devastatingly simple to ask and almost impossible to answer with any genuine honesty. How much of a parent's sin does a child inherit? We live in a cultural moment that insists loudly, repeatedly, and with genuine conviction on the principle of individual accountability. You are responsible for your own choices. You are not defined by your family. You are not your past. You have the capacity and the right to construct your own identity from the ground up, regardless of where or how you started. These are principles worth holding. They are worth protecting. And yet, when the family in question is the British royal family, when the identity is not privately assembled but publicly assigned, institutionally constructed, and constitutionally inherited from birth, those modern, well-intentioned principles collide with a structure that is by its nature, by its function, by its entire historical reason for existing about bloodline, about lineage, about the choices and the failures and the contributions and the disgraces of the people who came before you mattering enormously, permanently, and sometimes catastrophically to who you are permitted to become. Philosophers have a name for what is happening to Beatrice and Eugenie. They call it collective punishment, the imposition of consequences on a group for the actions of one of its members. It is considered unjust by virtually every serious ethical framework that has engaged with the concept. It violates the foundational principle that responsibility must be proportional and individual. It treats people as extensions of others rather than as autonomous human beings with their own moral standing, their own choices, their own record. And yet institutions practice it. Families practice it. The British monarchy has always practiced it, because institutions are not constructed on philosophical principles. They are constructed on survival. And survival sometimes demands decisions that no ethical framework can cleanly justify. Beatrice and Eugenie have done nothing wrong. They may lose everything anyway. There is a version of this story where losing the titles represents something closer to release than loss, where Beatrice, sharp, capable, genuinely accomplished on her own terms, finally gets to exist in professional spaces without dragging the weight of a designation that now carries more liability than protection. Where Eugenie's work on anti-slavery advocacy finally gets to speak for itself, without every word being filtered through the lens of her father's disgrace. That version is real. It is possible. It may even be what both women quietly hope for on the mornings when the name feels heavier than the crown it is attached to. But there is another version, where two women who have already paid an enormous, entirely unearned price for something they did not create are asked to pay one final, irreversible installment, where the institution that shaped every dimension of their identity since the moment they were born decides, quietly, efficiently, without public acknowledgement, that the cleanest solution to a problem they did not cause is to make them disappear from the official record entirely. Neither version has a clean ending. That is the truth that this story refuses to offer. There is a specific kind of cruelty that belongs to slow-motion disasters, A sudden catastrophe, a single headline, a diagnosis, a moment you can point to on a calendar at least carries the mercy of clarity. You know where the line is. You know what before and after mean. You can begin, however painfully, however slowly, to rebuild from that fixed point. What Beatrice and Eugenie have lived through is not a single crash. It is a tide. It rises. It retreats just enough to suggest it may be finished. And then it rises again higher, carrying more debris, leaving less of the original shoreline intact each time. So where does it end? There are three possible futures. All of them are real. All of them are already in motion. The first, Charles acts. Formal letters patent. The HRH designations are removed. The initial coverage is brutal, unavoidably, predictably, completely. And then gradually, quietly, something shifts. Beatrice and Eugenie begin to breathe. They are no longer required to be silent in the name of an institution that has never once publicly acknowledged their sacrifice. They speak. They define themselves on their own terms. They become, in time, something the monarchy never quite managed to make them while they were inside it. Themselves. The second, Charles hesitates. The public relations calculations, the visible sympathy for two clearly blameless women, the memory of what his mother would have wished, all of it gives him pause. Beatrice and Eugenie remain technically royal, technically within the institution's protection, and they continue to live inside the blast radius indefinitely, neither fully in nor fully out, neither free nor truly sheltered, carrying a name that grows heavier with every new document unsealed in a New York federal courtroom. The third, they decide for themselves. They do not wait for the machinery. They do not wait for Charles to act or hesitate or signal. They step forward voluntarily and release the designation, not because they were pushed, but because they chose to walk. The choice Princess Anne made for Peter and Zara 4 decades ago. That third future is the most radical of the three. It is also, arguably, the most genuinely royal thing either woman could do, because real dignity has never required a title. It has only ever required the courage to know who you are without one. Let's be honest about what this story actually is. It is not a scandal about a prince. Andrew's choices, his consequences, his arrest, they are the catalyst for this story, but they are not the heart of it. The heart of it is two women who have spent 6 years trying to hold their lives together with dignity, restraint, and a silence that has cost them something real, protecting an institution that has never once, publicly and directly, acknowledged the price they have paid for that loyalty. That, more than any court document, any arrest, any constitutional amendment, is the real scandal at the center of all of this. 3 questions. No clean answers. Leave yours in the comments. Should Beatrice and Eugenie walk away before the decision is made for them? Is King Charles protecting the monarchy or sacrificing his nieces to preserve it? And the hardest one, if you were Beatrice, waking up tomorrow morning, picking up your phone, seeing your father's name trending for the 8th year in a row, what would you do? This story is not over. The next chapter depends on a decision not yet made in a palace that does not comment, by a king who does not explain himself. But when it comes, and it is coming, FameX will be here.